Welcome back this weekend, and as far as memoirs go, this one reads more like a thriller. Spy boss Moe Shaik is telling his side of the story, finally. The book is called the ANC Spy Bible, Surviving Across the Enemy Lines. In it, he describes his relationship with a special branch officer dubbed the Nightingale who turned rogue, and also talks candidly about working with the former President Jacob Zuma and his brother's infamous relationship with him. Moe Shaik, a very warm welcome to you, and thanks for joining us today. I think it was John le Carre who said this: "It's unusual for a spy to break ranks and spill the beans. There is a powerful code among spooks." Why did you write this book?
Well, it's a story that was brewing in me for a long time, partly because of the way it began, and partly because the hero of the story, the Nightingale, remains largely unrecognized. And I just thought it was a great story to tell, and I thought I didn't have any particular view on the timing. I thought long and hard about it. It took me 4 years writing it as a novel and then converting it into a memoir with the help of Mike Nichols, the editor. And yeah, I just had to get it out of me.
Why did you turn it from a novel into an autobiography, essentially? Well,
because the book deals with some very difficult periods in my life and in my family's life, it was easier to write it as a novel because it gives you some cognitive dissonance, disconnect, that allows you to tell the story without getting overwhelmed by the story itself. And as it turned out, it was a poorly written novel.
And easier, perhaps, to fess up and,
yes,
give us the, instead of the veneer, to give us the real story. I want to go back to June 1985, the height of apartheid depravity in South Africa. You allow yourself to be detained. That opens the book. What was that strategy about, and why were you doing that?
Well, as I say in the book, we were under surveillance. We were keeping Ismail Ibrahim in our under our protection of our unit. And the big question is, if I ran and then the security branch would have known that we know about them, and we needed those crucial 3 days in a way to deceive them, that they have me and possibly then will have Ibrahim. But of course, the plan was I was the decoy so that Ibrahim could escape.
And you are smoking furiously at that point. You write about you need the nicotine to calm your nerves, and then you were detained.
Yes.
And it was difficult then, I would imagine, to write about the torture that you were then subjected to.
Sure. I think torture is the one thing that we have spoken very little about in the country. We touched on it on the TRC, but the trauma of detention, and don't forget that I am just a simple example of the tens of thousands of people who were detained in various conditions, solitary confinement, etc. And most of us walk the streets today of democratic South Africa with their trauma. And I think, if anything, the book tries to highlight is how, as South Africans as a whole, we have various degrees of trauma, we have various degrees of being brutalized, but yet we as a country don't speak about it. And other countries that have had other experiences, Germany, for example, they have, in the post-Nazi era, they embarked upon programs that started to recognize the enormous trauma of what it is to have lived under the Nazi regime. I think, and I make the point in the book, that in South Africa we're unable to even talk about the effects of apartheid on victims without getting the backs up of a large section of our population.
So we choose to ignore it.
And we choose to ignore it. But And that's the point I make, that we choose to ignore this brutalization. And I want to say brutalization on both sides of the equation.
Yes.
We would suffer the fragility. When this trauma breaks out, it threatens the fragility of the fabric of our society, as we have seen. We have seen that we're not a country that is capable yet of having difficult and crucial conversations. So we retreat. We retreat into our lagers. We retreat into our dining rooms, and the prejudices that we have of each other filter through into an unheard conversation in this country.
I'm going to skip to bits of it because time is always against us in a situation like this. You referenced Nightingale.
Yes.
I want you to explain the providence of that relationship to us. You were an optometrist.
That's correct.
You describe yourself as a timid man. He walked into your business and offered you what?
He offered me a file. He offered me a file that was brown. It had those typical official ruled lines. It was stamped Etes Geheim in red, top secret, bound by the silver with the green string that goes through it. And I looked at this file and I said, oh my God, this is a trap. This is a trap. If I touch this file, I'm in trouble. But there was a part of that file that was screaming out of me, says, open this, open this. And I photocopied, he left, I photocopied it, and I opened it. And in turning of that page, I turned a new page in my life. I was attracted to secrets. I was attracted to wanting to know more. And that took me to a path for the next 40 years of my life.
Why did he choose you?
It's a question I cannot answer. Because he had two people to choose. He either had Eunice, which I thought was the more better candidate, or he could choose me. I think maybe he tried Eunice and he couldn't get hold of him, so he went to the next best. So I'm accidental in that sense.
How valuable was he as a double agent?
Incredibly valuable. Incredibly valuable. Having access to the information he provided gave us, for the first time in my view, a very detailed understanding of the security branch, how they work, their infiltration strategies, how they process information, what is their structure, how they report to each other, how they share information amongst each other. And it gave us, it opened a window into the mind of the security branch, which we did not know before that.
Which ultimately led to something called Operation Bible.
That's correct. Yeah. And Operation Bible, and the reason why the book is named ANC Spy Bible, it's in a way my way of honoring President Oliver Tambo of the ANC, because it is he who coined the frame Bible. It says these reports, insofar as it concerns him, is as true as the Bible. So the project was then called the Bible Project.
I don't have time to then move on to Operation Vula, which then resulted from that, because I want to get to the Heifer Commission in just a moment. But you write this about Nightingale. Both he and I live our lives trapped in time. We are linked to a horrible past, and although we acted honorably, it will not let us go. It still lives with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Every single day.
Absolutely.
Every single moment.
And I mean, and let me just give you an example. When he is in a traumatic situation, who's the first person he calls? He calls me. If he hears that I am in a traumatic situation, as I was recently with the DA, he called me to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you coping? So this bond between the two of us.
Describe it. What is the nature today in 2020 of that of that relationship?
Well, I think when you have shared the kind of the bubble bath of secrets, and remember, every time we met, Jeremy, I didn't know whether he turned, he didn't know whether I turned, and the adrenaline in that situation lives on, right? But I made him dependent on me in order to manage this, and I'm paying that price today of that dependency, because the dependency after a relationship doesn't simply go away. It still exists, and you've got to manage that. And
you call him a hero, an unsung hero?
Yes. In my mind, he's a hero. He's an unsung hero. And yeah, it is. I mean, imagine someone who could never tell friends and people that he was the spy. So I think he lives, in that sense, trapped in the memory of that time.
Then the Heifer Commission, we'll skip to that. You say it's one of the worst periods of your life. Give me the context that then led to a very well-publicized apology.
Well, the Heifer Commission was not about establishing the truth. The Heifer Commission, and I think this is where, again, as a country, we robbed ourselves of another opportunity to deal with the broad issues of informers, spies, askaris, whatever you may want to call them. The Heifer Commission turned out to be a kangaroo court, in my view, with all due respect to Judge Heifer. He stuck very strictly to his terms. I hope he... I don't know whether he's alive or not now. I hope that he would have taken a page from the Zondo Commission, which seeks to broaden the ambit rather than limit the ambit. And he limited the ambit of the references. And of course, it was easy for him to do that because President Mbeki kept changing the terms of reference narrower and narrower and narrower. So in the end of the day, I would have to say that the Heifer Commission was not about establishing the truth. It was about dismissing political opponents, which is sad. But at the same time, I must say that I accepted the findings of the Heifer Commission. I apologized to Bulelani Nuka and his wife.
You essentially had suggested that he was an apartheid spy.
I suggested that we investigated him, which we did, and that we found in our investigation grounds to believe that he most probably was. But that turned out to be not true. And
how could you make a mistake like that?
Well, and this is where context matters. Judge Heifer and other people, Jonathan Answer, when he writes about it in his book, makes reference to it would have been easy. Well, it was not easy. We were living in underground conditions. We were stealing files. We had no access to all the kind of information that is now available. We had to painfully stitch information and find out from second hand or third hand how this is, etc. So it wasn't a clumsy investigation, and I think in deference to the ANC, when we provided the information, they didn't act on it.
There are two other issues that I need to touch on as I'm very cognizant of the clock. On your brother Shabir Shaik, you say this: I feel he could have acted differently and more appropriately in his business affairs, but I cannot fault him on his generous support for Zuma, President Zuma. In this, he acted in accordance with the bonds of solidarity that defined us within the ANC. When you say he could have acted differently, in what way?
Well, remember, I'm writing the book with hindsight. And of course, in business relationships, when one is challenged about whether you do, in fact, represent a particular type of business, it is easy to what I call seek political connectivity, seek the authority of seniors. And I think that is where he should not have done that. And the business should speak on its own. But equally, at that time, he was under pressure to show that he did in fact have political connection, because the people, and in this case I think it was the French, they wanted a demonstration of political connection, and he gave it, and I don't think he should have given it in that form.
I accept the hindsight narrative, but at the time, did you tell him that? Did you warn him? Did you say you were being an idiot?
I didn't know
the extent
of how he was communicating, but in fairness, at that time, and this is now goes way back to 97, 98, the entire concept of black economic empowerment was in its genesis. It was evolving, and I think what was unfair was whether we should have had a debate about a code of conduct then. So I think he was charged for inappropriate behavior, but helping Zuma at that particular time, I would still maintain it was the right thing to do. That was the bonds of solidarity.
The final question to you then, on Jacob Zuma. I will never know when precisely Jacob Zuma lost his way. He was not always like this. Power changed him for the worst. It fed his insecurities, causing him to believe he was a victim in the machination of others. Trapped in this state of mind, you say, he became increasingly transactional in the affairs of state, unable to see the error of his ways. How did he lose his way, in your opinion?
Well, I think we should get the best minds of our neuroscientists together to understand the effects of dopamine on the neural pathways. But I think what I'm trying to portray there is that presidential power is a very lonely place. And you've got to start off on the basis that it's a lonely place. And you must rely on good advisors. You must rely on senior advisors that can help you avoid the trappings of power. And I think because Zuma did not have that coterie of senior advisors around him, he fell victim to the machinations of his own mind, that what he's doing is right. When everyone around him was saying, perhaps what you're doing is not right. And as we are now seeing in the Heifer Commission and in all the media exposés that we are witnessing.
Comparisons in a funny way with Donald Trump.
Well, comparisons with leaders who give in to the dopamine neural pathways, which produces a kind of egocentric, which produces a kind of social distance. Often some people may even refer that to the narcissistic tendencies that come from power.
Just a quick one. You talk about the game of secrets ultimately comes to destroy those who play it. Eventually you become a stranger to those closer to you. Are you suggesting that you never stop being a spy? Right now as we talk, are you still a spy?
No, I'm not a spy.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. But the scientific or the intelligence methodology never leaves you. And that is what I'm referring to. That never leaves you, where you constantly check, double check, cross check, interpret differently. Is this a scenario? Is this a possible scenario? And that's not a nice way to live your life. You never take things at face value.
Moe Shaik, thank you very much indeed. The book is called the ANC Spy Bible, Surviving Across the Enemy Lines. And as I said at the beginning, I was expecting to read a tome, and it reads like a thriller. So thank you very much for talking to us. ENCA this weekend, I will take you back live to Cape Town very shortly for the ongoing funeral of Tasneem van Wyk.